The bus ride took longer than expected. The further we moved from the city, the more the landscape changed. Towering trees, long stretches of abandoned farmland, and roads that seemed to have been forgotten by time. My phone had lost service an hour ago, and the eerie quiet of the countryside made me uneasy. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, my backpack clutched tightly against my chest. I had no choice but to come here. After my parents' accident, Uncle Richard was my only living relative willing to take me in. I barely knew him. He was my mother's older brother, an eccentric man who had always lived in seclusion. My mother rarely spoke of him, and when she did, it was with a strange mix of fondness and weariness. I had met him only a handful of times as a child, but I remembered his intense eyes, his slow, deliberate way of speaking, and the way he always seemed to be listening to something I couldn't hear. The bus finally came to a stop at the edge of a gravel road leading into dense woods. I stepped off hesitantly, watching as the vehicle rumbled away, leaving me in an almost unnatural silence. A few moments later, I spotted Uncle Richard standing at the end of the path, his tall frame rigid, his hands clasped behind his back. He was just as I remembered, gaunt, with graying hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. He nodded once in greeting. "Ethan," he said simply. "Uncle Richard," I replied, adjusting the strap of my backpack. "We should get inside before dark." There was something unsettling about the way he said it. I followed him down the narrow path, the trees growing closer together as we moved further into the woods. The house appeared suddenly, as though it had been hiding between the trees. It was large but old, its wooden structure weathered and darkened with age. The windows were small, and heavy curtains covered most of them. There was no sign of modernity, no visible satellite dishes, no security lights. As we stepped onto the porch, Uncle Richard unlocked the front door with a heavy brass key. The hinges groaned in protest as he pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The air smelled of aged wood, faintly tinged with something I couldn't quite place, something damp and earthy. "Come in. I'll show you to your room," he said, stepping aside. The inside of the house was even more antiquated than I had expected. Dark wooden floors creaked underfoot, and every piece of furniture looked like it belonged in a different century. Heavy bookshelves lined the walls of the hallway, filled with ancient tomes and dusty manuscripts. Candles sat in brass holders, though I noticed an old oil lamp flickering at the end of the hall. "There are some rules you need to follow while you stay here," Uncle Richard said as we climbed the stairs. "They are very important. You must obey them at all times." I frowned. "Rules?" He stopped at the top of the stairs and turned to face me. "Yes. I will explain them after dinner. For now, settle into your room." My bedroom was at the end of the hall. It was surprisingly neat, plain wooden furniture, a modest bed with crisp white sheets, and a window overlooking the thick woods behind the house. There were no electronics, no television, not even a clock. As I set my bag down, I caught sight of something unusual on the nightstand. A single sheet of paper with neat, precise handwriting. "House rules. Lock your bedroom door before midnight. Do not open it until sunrise. If you hear footsteps outside your door at night, do not make a sound. Never enter the basement. If you hear someone whispering your name from the forest, ignore it. The attic must remain locked. Do not attempt to open it. If the power goes out, do not light any candles after 3 a.m. If you see someone in the house who looks like me but does not speak, avoid them at all costs. Do not go outside after dark. If you wake up and find the front door open, wake me immediately. Do not, under any circumstances, talk to the woman in the mirror." My breath caught in my throat. My hands tightened around the paper as I reread each rule, my stomach twisting into knots. This had to be a joke, right? A sudden creak from the hallway made me jump. I turned toward the door, my heart pounding. The floorboards outside my room groaned, as if someone were standing just beyond the threshold. I swallowed hard, my fingers still gripping the paper. My uncle's voice called from downstairs. "Ethan, dinner's ready." I exhaled shakily, forcing myself to relax. Shoving the list into my backpack, I stepped out of my room and made my way downstairs. But as I reached the bottom step, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me through the crack in the door. And whatever it was, it hadn't moved away. Dinner was a quiet affair. Uncle Richard wasn't much of a talker, and I didn't know what to say. My mind kept drifting back to the list of rules I had found in my room. Every single one of them sounded ridiculous, like something out of a bad horror movie, but the way they were written, the sheer urgency in their tone, made them feel disturbingly real. I picked at my food, my appetite lost. The dim candlelight in the dining room cast long shadows across the wooden walls. The atmosphere in the house was suffocating, thick with something I couldn't quite name. "Ethan," Uncle Richard finally spoke, placing his fork down. "Did you read the rules?" I hesitated before nodding. "Yeah. What's up with that? Some kind of joke?" His expression didn't change. If anything, his face darkened, the flickering light making the creases in his skin more pronounced. "They are not a joke," he said firmly. "They are for your safety." I scoffed. "Come on, Uncle Richard. Don't talk to the woman in the mirror? Avoid someone who looks like you? That's insane." "You may think that now," he said, his voice measured, "but I need you to promise me that you will follow them, no matter how strange they seem." His gaze was so intense that I found myself nodding. "Fine. I promise." He studied me for a long moment before giving a slow nod. "Good. Keep your door locked at night. And no matter what you hear, do not open it." Something in the way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. My uncle was clearly serious about this, and while I still thought it was bizarre, a part of me, deep down, felt uneasy. After dinner, Uncle Richard excused himself and disappeared into his study, leaving me alone in the dimly lit house. I wandered through the halls, feeling like an intruder in my own home. The house felt ancient, like it had soaked up decades of secrets within its walls. The rules weighed heavily on my mind. My curiosity was eating at me, whispering that maybe I should test them, just to prove how ridiculous they were. But another part of me, the part that had felt eyes on me from the crack in the door earlier, wasn't so sure. I eventually made my way back to my room. I hesitated before locking the door behind me. It felt silly, but my uncle's words rang in my head. "No matter what you hear, do not open it." I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet creaks of the house settling. The wind outside rustled the trees, and every now and then, a soft groan of wood echoed through the halls. I closed my eyes, trying to push away the unease curling in my gut. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, right outside my door. My breath caught in my throat. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. Uncle Richard, maybe? But the steps were slow, almost hesitant, like whoever, or whatever it was waiting for something. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the blanket tightly. Then the footsteps stopped. A long silence stretched out. And then, a whisper. Low, almost melodic. "Ethan." My blood ran cold. Every hair on my body stood on end. The voice was faint but unmistakable. It wasn't my uncle's voice. I pressed my hand over my mouth, my pulse hammering in my ears. The rule echoed in my mind. If you hear footsteps outside your door at night, do not make a sound. I lay there, frozen, barely daring to breathe. Seconds passed. Then minutes. The silence became unbearable. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the presence outside my door faded. The footsteps retreated, slow and measured, down the hall. I didn't move until the first light of dawn crept through my window. Only then did I finally let out the breath I had been holding. Maybe the rules weren't so ridiculous after all. I woke up to a pale, gray light seeping through the curtains. My body was stiff from staying in the same position all night, too afraid to move. The memory of the footsteps and the whisper still clung to my mind, making my skin crawl. Despite the morning light, the house felt no less eerie. The air was heavy, and silence pressed against my ears. Slowly, I got up and unlatched the door, peeking into the hallway. It was empty, as though nothing had ever happened. I forced myself to move, to act normal. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe my mind had played tricks on me, amplifying the ordinary creaks of an old house into something sinister. I tried to believe that as I made my way downstairs. Uncle Richard was already awake, seated at the dining table, sipping dark coffee from a chipped mug. He looked up as I entered, his piercing blue eyes scanning my face as if searching for something. "You look tired," he said simply. "Didn't sleep well," I admitted, taking a seat across from him. I heard something. Outside my door. Footsteps. And a voice. Uncle Richard's expression didn't change. He simply took another sip of his coffee, then set the cup down with deliberate slowness. "Did you open the door?" I shook my head. "No. I stayed quiet, just like the rules said." His shoulders relaxed slightly. "Good. That was the right thing to do." I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to ask who or what had been outside my door, but something in his demeanor made me hesitate. He wasn't going to tell me, not yet. Maybe not ever. Instead, he placed a plate of toast and eggs in front of me. "Eat," he said. "You'll need your strength." The morning passed in a haze. Uncle Richard busied himself with tasks around the house while I wandered, trying to push away the lingering unease. I found myself standing in front of the basement door, its old wooden surface chipped and worn. One of the rules stood out in my mind. Never enter the basement. I had no intention of breaking that rule. Not after last night. But as the day wore on, my resolve weakened. The rules made no sense, and the more I thought about them, the more my curiosity grew. What was Uncle Richard hiding? What was so dangerous about the basement? By the time night fell, my decision had already been made. I just needed to be careful. I waited until Uncle Richard retreated to his study, the sound of pages turning and pen scratches filtering through the closed door. The house was silent apart from the occasional crack of wood expanding in the cold night air. Heart pounding, I crept toward the basement door. My fingers hovered over the knob. I hesitated, a final warning flashing in my mind. "Don't do this." I twisted the handle and pulled. The door opened with a quiet creak, revealing a staircase descending into pitch blackness. A heavy, damp smell wafted up from below, making my stomach churn. I took a step forward, then another. The wooden steps groaned beneath my weight. The deeper I went, the colder it became. My breath turned shallow, the air thick with something ancient. Then, I heard it. A whisper, low and urgent, echoing from the darkness below. "You shouldn't be here." I froze, my pulse slamming against my ribs. The voice was close. Too close. Something moved in the darkness. I turned to flee, but the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut, trapping me in the abyss. Darkness swallowed me whole. The cold, damp air of the basement pressed against my skin, sending shivers up my spine. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I struggled to adjust to the suffocating blackness. The heavy wooden door above had slammed shut with such force that dust rained down from the ceiling, stinging my eyes. I reached out blindly, my fingers brushing against rough stone walls. The whisper I had heard moments before still echoed in my head. "You shouldn't be here." A part of me wanted to believe it had been my imagination, that my mind was twisting shadows into something sinister. But I knew better. Something was down here with me. A floorboard creaked above. Uncle Richard. Did he know I had come down here? Would he come to get me, or was I truly alone? I took a hesitant step forward, my foot landing on what felt like uneven concrete. The air smelled of mildew and something metallic, like rusted iron. My fingers brushed against a switch on the wall. Holding my breath, I flicked it up. A single dim bulb buzzed to life, casting a weak yellow glow. The basement was larger than I had expected, lined with wooden shelves stacked high with old books, boxes, and jars filled with unidentifiable substances. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and in the far corner, a thick iron door stood partially open. My heart pounded. Why was there an iron door in the basement? I took another step forward, my curiosity battling my fear. The air grew colder as I approached, an unnatural chill seeping into my bones. The gap in the iron door was just wide enough for me to see inside. Something was carved into the walls beyond it, symbols, intricate and ancient, looping in circular patterns. A large wooden chair sat in the center of the room, heavy leather straps dangling from its arms. Dark stains splattered the floor beneath it. I sucked in a sharp breath. A scraping sound came from the darkness beyond the iron door. I stumbled back, heart hammering against my ribs. The whisper came again, closer this time. "You shouldn't be here." Panic surged through me, and I turned, sprinting back toward the stairs. My hand slammed against the wooden door at the top, rattling the handle. Locked. "No, no, no," I muttered, yanking at it. My palms were slick with sweat. "Uncle Richard." Footsteps sounded on the other side. Slow. Deliberate. A key turned in the lock, and the door creaked open. My uncle stood there, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he just stared at me, as if debating something within himself. Then he sighed and gestured for me to follow him. Shaken, I climbed the stairs, stepping into the dim hallway. My uncle shut the door behind me, locking it with a key before slipping it into his pocket. "You shouldn't have gone down there," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. What is this place?" I demanded, still breathless. "Why do you have a room like that? What were those symbols?" He ran a hand down his face, looking older than I had ever seen him. "It's not safe to ask questions you aren't ready to hear the answers to." "Then make me ready," I snapped. I deserve to know what's going on. I'd found the rules. I heard someone down there. Who was whispering to me? A flicker of something, regret? Sadness crossed his face before he turned away. "Go to bed, Ethan. We'll talk in the morning." "No." I grabbed his arm. "Tell me now." He exhaled slowly, pulling his arm free. "You broke a rule tonight. The house knows. And now, something knows about you. Something that wasn't supposed to." A chill swept through me. "What are you talking about?" He glanced toward the basement door, as if he could see through it. "I need to prepare. Lock your door tonight. Do not open it, no matter what you hear." And Ethan, his eyes locked onto mine, filled with something close to fear. "If someone calls your name again, don't answer." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, my mind spinning. I had wanted answers. Instead, I had only found more questions. And something told me that tonight, I was going to wish I had never asked at all. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my uncle's warning replaying in my mind. "If someone calls your name again, don't answer." The house was silent, but not the comfortable kind of silence. It was the kind that felt expected, as if something was lurking just beyond perception, waiting. I checked the lock on my door 3 times before climbing back under the covers, forcing myself to take slow, steady breaths. My heart was still racing from what I had seen in the basement, the symbols, the chair, the voice. What had I disturbed down there? And why was Uncle Richard so afraid? At some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. A sound woke me. A soft knock. 3 taps, slow and deliberate. I sat up, every muscle in my body tensing. My throat was dry as I stared at the door, waiting. Then, a voice. Low, almost familiar. "Ethan?" The hairs on my arms stood on end. My mind screamed at me to stay silent, to obey the rules. I clutched the blanket tighter, pressing myself against the headboard. Another knock. "Ethan, it's me. Let me in." I recognized the voice now. It was my mother's. A cold wave of fear washed over me. My mother had been dead for 5 years. I squeezed my eyes shut. This wasn't real. This was something else. Something wrong. Ethan. The voice was softer now, almost pleading. Don't you miss me? Tears burned in my eyes. I did miss her. Every single day. But this wasn't her. It couldn't be. The handle rattled. I shoved my fist against my mouth to keep from making a sound. The door didn't budge. It was locked, just like Uncle Richard had told me to do. But I could hear it breathing on the other side. Slow, deep, and unnatural. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the knocking stopped. The breathing faded. The hallway fell silent once more. I didn't move. I didn't dare. I sat there, rigid, waiting for the first light of dawn. Hours passed before I finally convinced myself it was safe. The sun's early glow filtered through my curtains, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I stood on shaky legs and approached the door, my fingers trembling as I reached for the knob. Slowly, I unlocked it and pulled it open just enough to peek outside. Nothing. The hallway was empty. But as I looked down, my blood ran cold. Scratched into the wood of my door, deep and jagged, was a message. You should have answered. The message on my door sent a chill down my spine. You should have answered. The letters were uneven, scratched deep into the wood as if carved by frantic, desperate hands. My stomach twisted as I traced the grooves with my fingertips. Whoever, or whatever, had been outside my door last night and wanted me to answer. And I had no idea what would have happened if I had. I staggered back, my breath uneven. My first instinct was to find Uncle Richard. He had warned me about the rules, but now I needed more than just vague instructions. I needed to know what was haunting this house. I found him in the kitchen, already pouring himself a mug of black coffee. He looked up as I entered, his gaze immediately landing on my face, then shifting to my shaking hands. He knew something had happened before I even spoke. What did you hear? He asked, setting down his mug. I hesitated. A voice. Knocking. It sounded like my mother. Something flickered across his face. Regret? Sorrow? Maybe even fear. He exhaled sharply and pulled out a chair. Sit down. I obeyed, my pulse still hammering in my ears. Uncle Richard leaned forward, his voice lower than before. This house, it remembers people. It learns from them. And it uses their memories against them. I swallowed hard. So that wasn't really her? He shook his head. No. It was something else. Something old. He rubbed a hand over his face. You didn't answer it, did you? I shook my head, gripping the edges of my chair. No. But it left a message. Scratched into my door. His jaw clenched. He stood abruptly and grabbed a set of keys from the counter. Show me. I led him back upstairs, my hands cold and clammy. When we reached my door, he stopped, his eyes scanning the deep scratches in the wood. He let out a slow breath and ran his fingers over the letters, as if feeling them would confirm something he already feared. This isn't good, he muttered. What does it mean? My voice was barely above a whisper. He turned to me, his expression grim. It means it knows you now. It knows you're aware of it. A cold weight settled in my stomach. So what do I do? Uncle Richard didn't answer right away. He pulled something from his pocket, a small glass vial filled with a dark, viscous liquid, and pressed it into my hand. Put this above your door tonight. It won't stop it, but it might confuse it. Might buy us time. I stared at the vial. Time for what? His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something in them I never expected. Fear. Time to find a way to send it back.